Hi, I'm Dine Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have a special guest. He's the author of the book, A Collection of Modern Day Parables, or 40, right? 40, a
That's correct.
collection of modern day parables. No other than Mr. John Cleveland.
Hey, Daniel.
Welcome to Book 101, Mr. John. And can you please introduce more about yourself?
Sure. My name's John Cleveland. I currently live in Ogden, Utah. I'm 48 years old, and I work for the Job Corps here in our area.
That'd be awesome. So, Mr. John, thank you for sharing your talents to the world. Looking forward for more empowering books to come. So, what makes a modern day parable different from a
So
traditional one?
that's a good question. My book is faith based, and if you have any familiarity with the Bible, it says in Matthew 13 that Jesus used parables. He used stories exclusively when he taught to people. And he said that it was for people whose hearts were open, that it would be helpful to them. It would be the way that they could understand concepts and receive the message about the kingdom. He says, but for other people whose hearts were hard or if they were closed, that the story would go right over their heads. So my stories are similar to that. Most of them contain elements of faith, and it's not blatant. There are illustrations and there are stories. And so, if people are seeking God, if they're seeking faith, then the stories will probably hit home for them.
How do you identify a key lesson or moral to convey in your parable?
Sure. Well, there's 40 different stories, and they cover just a wide range of biblical topics and elements of faith, and also just about humanity. And they're all very lighthearted. This is not a heavy theological preachy book. That's not what it is at all. This is meant to be very gentle towards anybody, regardless of where they are with their faith. And so morale, the morality is not heavy-handed. It's not that type of book.
So, what role do contemporary issues play in shaping the themes of your parable?
Sure. So what I did was I used modern day concepts. I used modern day themes to illustrate age old ideas. I've used cruise ships, I've used coffee, I've used pet dogs, I've used electric cars, I've used starships. But I use each of these to tell stories that illustrate different concepts of faith.
How do you create characters a modern day parable that feel relatable and
Sure.
authentic?
Sure. Well, most of my stories are about humans. A few actually do involve animals. There's one that actually features my dog Henry as we take him for a walk around the neighborhood. But most of the people are just like you and me. They're normal people with everyday responsibilities and everyday worries and cares. And they find themselves in different situations. And as they navigate through these situations, certain truths unfold.
So, how do you balance storytelling with delivering a clear moral message?
So I think that a lot of people are receptive to stories. Since we were kids, we've been told stories to help us understand things, to help us learn. Some people, they learn just by reading a textbook or by hearing a lecture, but a lot of people are story based with their learning style. And so I think that it's possible to incorporate both of them as we're trying to help people learn about faith.
Yes. So, what is the ideal setting for a modern day parable, and how does it influence the story?
So, what was the question again?
What is the ideal setting for a modern day parable?
Okay. Well, these stories take place all over. Some take place in factories, some take place in parks, some take place in outer space, some take place out at sea on boats. So the settings vary from story to story. The book has a ton of variety in it, and so you just never know. Each story is different from the next.
Did you use symbolism effectively in a modern day parable?
To some degree, most of these are just very on the nose. Most of these are just situations that a person could feasibly run into. So there's not a lot of symbolism in there.
Very well said. So, what is the conflict in a modern day parable?
So the conflict is our humanity, and that's what it is in life. We go through life and we are preoccupied with ourselves, with our responsibilities, with the things that we have to deal with on a daily basis. Life's challenges. And so we're constantly being distracted from the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is that, someone created this world and we're living on their planet, breathing their air, eating their food, and we're accountable to that being. And we should be grateful towards that being. And so that's the conflict is our flesh versus our spirit, and that's the conflict that we wrestle with as humans on a daily basis. And that's reflected in each story here. It's the conflict between being human and also being eternal creature, having a soul.
So, how does it lead to a resolution?
So not every story has a happy ending, even though it's lighthearted. It still takes our humanity into account, which is wonderful because we don't achieve salvation through human perfection. We achieve it through grace. And so the stories are very heavy on grace. It's about people running into situations that they can't fix themselves, or that are frustrating on their own. But they keep having to rely on grace to resolve these situations. And so they realize that it's okay to be a human and that there's been accommodations made for our humanity.
Very well said, Mr. John. Very well said. And how do you make a parable engaging for a modern audience while still retaining timeless wisdom?
Sure, sure. So when Jesus told parables, it was 2,000 years ago. And so the people that he was talking to, they were very familiar with things like agriculture, fishing, livestock. And so that was the subject of his parables. And whenever he would talk about the facets of those elements of life, people understood that. So all I've done is just modernize my stories so that they have to do with things that we are around on a daily basis. But they have some very parallel messages. Like I said, Jesus spoke about a huge variety of topics, everything that humans deal with on a daily basis, like money, friendships, work, possessions. He spoke about those things. And I speak about those things in my book, but I just use modern day elements to do that.
So, what are those modern elements?
Yeah, once again, it's just things that we're around in our culture. Like not many of us are professional farmers, and not many of us are professional fishermen, not many of us are professional shepherds. Most of us, we work in an office or we work on automobiles or we use, our hands in a technical aspect. And so the characters in my book, they're like we are. They work in corporate settings, they've got busy schedules, they live hectic lives, they like to shop on Amazon. These are normal people just like you and I are. So imagine if Jesus were to visit today instead of 2,000 years ago and he was speaking to us, he would have told stories about things that we could relate to. He would have told stories about things that are present in our culture with our technology. And he still would have conveyed the same messages, but it just would have been modernized.
What techniques did you use to ensure your parable is thoughtful, provoking, and impactful?
So a lot of it was trial and error. I'm really grateful to my editor. We had a developmental editor that went to the story for me, and they really helped refine the stories. They really helped clarify the message and to make sure that it appealed to the full spectrum of society. Men, women, all different nationalities, all different varieties of backgrounds. And so I was really grateful for them because, I'm a white middle-aged man, but obviously our world is made up of a huge variety of people that are not like me. So she was wonderful and just giving the book more of a broad appeal, making it more applicable.
So, how did you ensure that the moral or lesson of the parable does not feel too preachy or forced?
Good question. Good question. So I am not a fan of piety at all. I've experienced that when I was younger, when I was naive, or whatever adjective you want to use. And so now with my faith, I fully accept my humanity. I fully accept my flaws and my faults. And also when I deal with other people, it makes me more understanding towards their flaws and their faults. And so none of that is hidden in the book. I didn't pull any of punches. My characters are flawed. They have quirks, they have issues just like you and I do. They're normal, regular people. And so nothing is whitewashed here. Nobody is looked at with rose colored glasses. Everybody is completely human in the book. And that's usually the subject of a lot of the stories is, like I said, their humanity.
Humanity, people. So, what is the significance of the ending in a modern day parable, and how do you leave readers
Okay. Well, once
reflecting?
again, sure. Well, once again, my book is unique because it's a collection of 40 short stories. Each one takes about 10 to 15 minutes to read. So there's, in essence, 40 separate endings. But at the end of each one, the characters typically come to a conclusion. They've gone through a situation that they've had to kind of process and deal with. And at the end of it, they sort of have this light bulb moment, where all of a sudden they realize a truth either about themselves or about faith or about God or about the world, but it's just a light bulb moment.
Right, bulb moment. I like that. How do you handle the inclusion of humor or satire in your parables without undermining the moral?
So how do I incorporate humor?
Yes.
So, humor is a natural element of our life. And like in the Bible, humor is encouraged. There's a scripture verse that says, laughter doeth good like a medicine. And so there's nothing wrong with, laughing. There's nothing wrong with telling jokes. There's nothing wrong with being lighthearted. So I don't think that anything faith-based has to be very pious and rigid and serious. I don't imagine Jesus being that way when he was here. The scripture says that children gravitated towards him. So he had this kind of personality that was friendly and welcoming and trustworthy. He wasn't like this very stoic, rigid statue of a person that we often see him portrayed as. I think he was very likable. I think people were just naturally drawn to him. It says that he had these huge crowds that followed him everywhere. He was like what we would consider a rock star. People just wanted to be around him. And so I don't think that there is a conflict. I think it's a hindrance not to use humor whenever you're sharing who God is and what faith is.
What challenges did you face in writing the 40 collection of modern day parable?
So I guess if there was a challenge to it, it would be that I want it to be accurate. I don't want anything to be in conflict with the Bible. I guess that would be my number one concern, not a challenge. So I'm very careful in my writing. And second of all, for it to have some substance to it. Like I could just make up silly stories and they would be fun to read, but there wouldn't be anything to take away from it. So I think trying to use my skills as a writer, my ability to tell stories, but also infusing a moral truth into that, that's probably the biggest challenge.
Can you share one of your modern day parables for us? So can you read?
Sure. Um, it would take a while to read the whole thing, so I'll just read a paragraph or two if that's okay.
Yes.
And so I'll just start with the very first one. It's called Absent Manager, and it takes place in a factory. So I'll read a paragraph or two. Joe pulled the lever for cocoa powder and watched the brown dust fall into his little white cup. He looked around and grinned because he had secret information. You see, he had discovered that the hot beverage machine would dispense hot cocoa or coffee or cider or whatever, whether or not you put coins in it. Sometimes Joe would sit in the break room pretending to read the paper, but would secretly watch all the suckers putting quarter after quarter into the defunct device. Bunch of saps, he would say to himself. People are so gullible and naive. They all go through the motions of life, doing what they're supposed to without questioning anything. They never look for opportunities to get ahead. He shook his head with superiority and disdain. Well, better be getting back to work, he said aloud. If his coworkers had followed him back to his workstation, they would have witnessed little to no work being done at all. But he had appearances to maintain. You never know when there might be a peer review. So the story continues, and he actually runs into a new employee. He calls him a rookie, and this new employee is the opposite of him. This new employee is thin, and he's neat, and he's polite, and he's courteous, and he's hardworking. And this guy is sort of like older, and he's got a sour attitude, and he's lazy. And so anyway, the other guy's attitude just drives him crazy, and he does his best to discourage and dissuade him. But the young man is like, I have reasons to do a good job. I have reasons to be grateful. I have reasons to have a good attitude. And so it's symbolic of our attitude towards life and towards God, because we kind of see those two contrasted in society. You know, we see some people who have like very bitter, resentful attitudes, and you can't change that. And then we have other people who seem to go through life like with a pleasant demeanor and a grateful heart, and you can't change that in them. So it's just kind of highlighting the disparity between people.
Definitely. So, how do you adapt classic parable structures to fit into a contemporary themes or settings?
So, when Jesus told parables, they were very simple and straightforward. They were short, they were clear and concise. And so mine have a little more aggrandizement. Mine have some backstory and they delve into the personalities of the characters. So mine do have some entertainment value. The parables in the Bible are just a few verses long each. And like I said, mine take 10 to 15 minutes apiece. So mine does have entertainment value coupled with the moral lesson.
Definitely. So, how do you avoid cliche or overused moral lessons when writing a modern day parables?
So there probably is a little cliche in my book. There are some situations that are pretty on the nose. Some of them have a very obvious point. But once again, I don't make any claims to have a theological masterpiece. I never meant for it to be a heavy, serious book. So, if there are some cliches, I'm completely guilty of that. But once again, I wanted this to be an entertaining book.
Definitely. So, what role does dialogue play in a modern day parables, and how do you use it to reveal character and theme?
Sure. The dialogue, and one of the things that makes a book wonderful to me is when the dialogue is believable. Because people, we have these conversations and they're not fluid conversations. We have pauses, we have breaks, we have emotion that we convey with our voice and our inflection. And so it's really hard to capture that when you're writing. It's very hard to do that. And my editor had a fit. Like we had to go through and revise so much of my writing because it was very realistic. So, I think having believable dialogue, for people to actually talk the way that people talk, because we share secrets, we tell things about ourselves that we wouldn't want everybody to know, especially if we're in an intimate setting. And so my characters are like that. Whenever two friends are meeting, they pour their hearts out to each other. Whenever someone has a disagreement with somebody, they call them names and they, show the worst side of themselves. So the dialogue in my book is reflective of conversations that you would hear around you on a daily basis.
Certainly. So, how do you ensure your parables evoke strong emotional responses in your readers?
So I think that's the skill of a storyteller and a writer, because you could tell a story in two sentences and you would convey the general idea. But if you're able to paint a picture with words, if you're able to create an image in the reader's mind so that they can actually place themselves there and they can imagine what this person is like and how they sound and sort of the mood that is present there, I think that's why most people read is because they want to go to an imaginary world. So, that's, what I've tried to do with 40 is to try to create um, images in people's minds as they read.
What would be your advice for those aspiring writers out there to want to write a modern day parables?
um, I think I would encourage them to write a few test stories and then let their friends read them and to get some feedback and ask them to be very candid and honest because uh, there's thousands and thousands of authors out there. People are pumping out books by the day, and ideally, good quality books would be printed and good quality stories would be told. So I would encourage them to get some realistic feedback from people who would be honest.
Very good advice. Very good advice, Mr. John. What is your short term and long term goals in writing?
So, it does cost money and it takes time to publish a book. I wanted to do this the right way. So I, went through the whole process, which took about 6 months. And, I paid the money to have it done correctly, to have it edited and illustrated and to have the artwork done correctly. Um, so, ideally it would be self-sustaining, ideally, um, it would be able to pay for itself, and so I think that'll
Mm.
happen in time. Everybody that I've talked to says that your book has to gain momentum. So that would be like, I guess, a personal selfish goal, but like on a larger scale, I would like for it to provide an introduction to the reader and God. Not everybody is ready to go to church, not everybody's ready to read the Bible, but this is a soft way to sort of introduce the topic. This is a soft way to kind of open your mind to the possibility of God and a possibility of faith and salvation. So that would be my greater hope, is that it would serve a purpose, that it would create introductions.
Good luck for your goals, Mr. John. So, to sum up our discussion, a 40 collection of modern day parables. How can a modern day parable be used to challenge societal norms or provoke a critical thinking in readers?
So that's an excellent question because a large percentage of the world either doesn't believe in God or doesn't care about him. It doesn't think, they don't think that it's pertinent to their lives. But, I beg to differ. I think that we owe every breath to him. I think that we live every day with his permission. And whenever you're in a situation like that, whenever you're living on someone's planet and eating their food and drinking their water, you need to be gracious toward that host. And so, that's what I would say, is that the world offers this very strong message, is that there's no God and that we determine our own fate. But I would push back against that and saying there is a God and there's plenty of evidence to support that there is, and that you should consider that reality, that should consider your position relative to him. And so that would be my pushback against like the secular societal message.
Consider the reality, people. So, Mr. John Cleveland, can you please invite our listeners to support the 40 collection of modern day parables?
Sure. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoy the book. I would love to hear your feedback. You're welcome to visit my website, jcwriting.com.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. John Cleveland because if you support him, more modern day parables to come. So, Mr. John, thank you for your time.
Daniel, thank you so much. You've been great.
Bodycom people, see you soon. You're most welcome to come back, Mr. John, and promote all the books that you want to promote.